Hi, I'm Maddie, and today I'm going to be talking about ADHD for this discussion board for the Jigsaw. Um, and so basically, it's my PowerPoint. ADHD is a superpower, which and ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Um, and something interesting is I actually have ADHD. I was diagnosed a couple of semesters ago and I don't know, I was diagnosed through the school, through the counseling center and the um I don't know, student health plan and everything like that. And so it was a, I don't know, a really interesting process, and um I've come to learn a lot about ADHD just in the past semester or two. And so I don't know, this topic is very interesting to me because even though I have ADHD, I don't know everything about it. And I don't know, some things that I do, I don't know if those things are caused by ADHD or not. And so every time that have an opportunity to study it, I do. And so um, I'm grateful for this, I know, a chance to study even more. And so basically, ADHD is a disorder. It's technically not a disability according to the IDA, but it is a disorder, and it includes difficulty staying focused and paying attention, also difficulty controlling behavior and hyperactivity. Um, and so this often makes it very difficult to learn, especially in the current, basic public school system education kind of classroom, the way it's set up. Um, and so basically, it's kind of interesting because ADHD focuses both on the inattention, and so just kind of that difficulty to focus for long amounts of time, or to focus on things that are boring to the student or the child with ADHD, and then also hyper focusing on tasks. And so basically just kind of over focusing on one thing, um, whether that thing is productive or not. And so sometimes, for example, um, let's say a student is asked to do 10 minutes of a workbook in class. Um, and to them, that might seem boring. And so maybe instead, they are doing something that they find interesting, and they're hyper focusing on drawing a picture on the side of the workbook. And so obviously, that's not staying on task. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. Um, but their ADHD makes it more difficult for them to focus on those things. Um, and so kind of a little bit later on, we're going to kind of talk about why ADHD is a superpower. Because I think that at times, at least for someone with ADHD, it is a superpower, but it is difficult to know how to use that as a superpower, especially since the world kind of sees it as something that holds people back. And so, some kind of characteristics that a teacher would see in the classroom of a student or child with ADHD. There's kind of three different categories that I section these things into. So the first one is behavioral. And so ADHD, kind of the way it works is that um, you can see it by number one. There's a big list of things, but basically the behavioral characteristics of the classroom um, can kind of include, aggression, getting mad or upset easily, um, being very, excited or fidgeting around a lot, just having, a lot of energy is a very kind of common known one. And then hyperactivity, kind of the same thing. Impulsivity, which kind of having, those impulsive moments or actions where they can't control what they do as much, or at least example for me in my life um, is in the way for at least me as a student, and a student with ADHD, the impulsivity sometimes can come out as not being able to control what I say at certain moments. um, and so just kind of like as an example, like being able to um, think of something in your head, have that thought, and then kind of have it, think about it, and then say it. Sometimes it can be more difficult for people with ADHD to have that thought in their head and then think about saying it beforehand. It just kind of comes out impulsively. And so that's just an example. It's different for every person, obviously, but that for me, that's just an example. And then irritability, lack of restraint, or persistent repetition of words or actions. And so, especially in young children, which ADHD, when ADHD is often diagnosed, young children especially, um, just kind of like that repetition can be a very, I don't know, key factor in seeing if your student does have ADHD as you kind of, oversee them in the classroom. And then for number two, the next concept or category is cognitive characteristics. And so that basically just kind of talks about, absent-mindedness, kind of zoning out a little bit, not inability to focus, or difficulty focusing, and forgetfulness. Sometimes people with ADHD forget a lot. Um, and probably one of the kind of biggest ones to see in children, at least, to look out for, especially as us as we're teachers, educators, is problems paying attention or a short attention span, and kind of especially within the public school system, a lot of classes are set up of students sitting at desks, listening to lectures, doing some activities, um, individual workbook pages or assignments, which can be obviously very difficult for people with ADHD, where they might not always be able to learn in that way as well as other students. And then for the third category, possible kind of moods to be aware of as a teacher. And so to look for in your students is anger, anxiety, boredom, excitement, or mood swings. And so kind of just being able to notice any of those that might be a little bit out of the ordinary, um, and might be a little bit more severe than some of the other students. And then some student barriers that we have are, so basically just kind of in regards to the class curriculum, and just, I don't know, overall academic success of your students. And so a big one would be, focus. That barrier makes it a lot more difficult for students to, sit at their desk and work on one task for a very long time. And something kind of that I feel that is helpful, based on my research, is just, teachers switching activities often, using a lot of different ways of spacing out engagement of different kinds of material, because these students often struggle to sit still in the classroom. And so, getting kids to move up and move around, and just kind of switching the kinds and in the manner that activities are done. And so that's the first one, focus. And then hyperactivity, which is just kind of students having, a difficulty waiting their turn to speak, or, cutting people off, shouting out answers, saying things they don't mean, and disrupting classmates. And so back to personal story again, I guess. Oftentimes, at least for me, with my ADHD, sometimes it is hard because the thoughts that come into my head, or just kind of ideas I have, especially in the classroom, that if they come into my head and someone else is talking, it's really hard to not, blurt it out. It takes a lot of practice, and obviously I'm older. And so some of these students, these especially young children, won't really be able to regulate that as well. And so just, I don't know, being patient aware with times when students who that are known that they have ADHD, when they're kind of other people off for shouting out answers, kind of knowing how to handle that in a patient way, but also letting them know that that disrupts the class and that's not acceptable. And so I think it just probably takes practice, as teachers, to learn how to best handle those situations. And the last one, regulation, just kind of trouble regulating their stress, emotions, and that those kind of things are provoked easily. And especially with forgetfulness, that's one that can be difficult times because it makes it hard to remember tasks or instructions, things like that. And so those are some of the barriers that kind of will make it a little bit more difficult for those students. And so it's crucial to, know those things, especially in the curriculum of your class and just the overall success of all your students. And so being aware of that. And so some kind of ideas that I found through my research for possible accommodations or those kind of barriers are assistive technology. Um, and so kind of like I talked about earlier, how, a great thing to do is, switching up those activities in the manner that they are done, getting the students to, get up out of their seats and move around throughout the day. Um, and so just kind of for this, the use of, audiobooks, text to speech, videos, creative, websites that they can use to show their work, timers to, keep them accountable, and self-regulate. And then just being able to help them, organize their class time, that schedule that they have every day. And so basically just kind of more ways for them to show their learning when it is difficult for them to, just sit and read a page, read a book of filled with words because they can't focus as easily. And so just giving them other, options to use depending on their needs and their learning style. And then next, another accommodation would be to, adapt the variety of strategies and activities that are used to increase engagement. And so kind of just not making sure to not spend too much um, time on one assignment. Um, but maybe, helping those students if accommodation needs to be made, um, kind of helping them to, be able to switch to different tasks if needed. Um, and then some important cues, which is one that I found through my research that I hadn't thought of before, which I thought was, I know, really, really interesting and helpful, um, is kind of helping those students by providing a system, for written, non-verbal, verbal cues, um, when when as a teacher you're kind of going over something that needs to be focused on or um, that is important, and so those students might need to be, have an extra reminder to pay more attention. Um, and so, for example, just if you are going over, a date for a quiz or things like that, just kind of, having a signal um, or saying something out loud to let those students know that it's going to be really important that they should write this down or remember it. And then for, if you want to make that more specific, accommodations wise, there could be, a special signal for a certain student who might be struggling with that. Just if it's just a little, hand signal that they need to be paying attention or something like that would be helpful. And then something that I think, from my research and from my study of this, and also from personal experience, I guess, something that all, general education teachers should provide to these students is generally just a creative outlet to show those students with ADHD that it can be a superpower in the classroom. That even though sometimes it may seem like it makes everything more difficult and it makes, education difficult, because a lot of these students do feel that they are, not intelligent, that they do not have as much of a capability as some of their other classmates. Um, but what they don't know and what can be taught to them in these circumstances is that um, this, difference, this disorder that they have can help them in certain ways that they didn't know before. And so just some examples near the bottom here, just kind of that ability to hyper focus on their interests. And so just kind of helping them find their passions, constant brainstorm because those students with ADHD, their minds are often, moving very quickly and constantly. And so kind of helping them to um, hone in onto the most important parts of that brainstorming that they have, being active and engaged in things that they find interesting and in their passions, and then enthusiastic about collaboration because they, do have a lot of good ideas and like to share them most times. And so just kind of helping them have opportunities to do so in an appropriate, classroom student manner. Um, and then lastly, just some questions that I believe everyone should be asking about ADHD just to kind of, I don't know,